Good morning. It's Monday, December 15th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 802 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FTD Morning Brief. We all saw the horrific news out of Australia yesterday. I spent some time with that community on a speaking tour back in 2018. Never in my wildest dreams would I ever have imagined such carnage down under, but perhaps maybe that's not entirely accurate because in recent months we have seen signs of what was to come. And the Australian government did little to prevent this bloodbath. Folks, I see myself as a foreign policy analyst, not as a social commentator, but I'm not going to hold back. Not today. I'm going to have to take myself out of my comfort zone. So here it goes. For 2+ years, we've talked about the seventh front war spanning Iran, Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza, West Bank, and Syria. Qatar became the eighth front for one day back in September, but that was short-lived. There are also non-kinetic fronts where this war has been waged. Campus, mainstream media, social media, courtrooms, those are the ones that immediately come to mind. But inexorably, quietly, this war has spread to additional kinetic fronts. The mass murder yesterday in Australia, the murder of 2 Jews in Manchester on Yom Kippur in October, the murder of 1 Jew in Boulder back in June, and the killing of 2 Israeli staffers in Washington in May. These are the prominent attacks, but there have been scores of others too, ranging from Berlin to Warsaw to Tokyo. These are attacks against both Israelis and Jews worldwide. Now, for the uncomfortable part, from the perspective of the perpetrators, the attacks against Jews and Israelis are not two separate categories. They are one. Yes, there are many Jews who reject the notion of conflating Israelis with Jews, but guess what? For anti-Semites, that's a distinction without a difference. Increasingly, whether Jews like it or not, their fates and the fate of Israel are intertwined. I don't have any special insights about winning this front in the wider war, but I will tell you this. Trying to explain that Jews don't represent Israel or that Israel doesn't represent the Jews is a losing strategy. If American Jews don't want to lose this front in the multi-front war, it's time to pivot now. News roundup. Let's set aside Australia for a minute. It was one hell of a weekend for the news, so buckle up. Here we go. 2 American soldiers and a civilian translator were killed outside of Palmyra, Syria on Saturday. The attack was carried out by the Islamic State. This might indicate to you that the government of Syria was not involved. But just remember that it was not too long ago that ISIS and the Nusra Front were partners in the Syrian civil war. And the leader of the new Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, was not too long ago the head of said Nusra Front. It's all pretty murky from my perspective, but for now, we're going to wait for an American response. The Israelis took out a senior Hamas military figure over the weekend. I don't know if we can call it senior anymore. Anyway, Rad Saad was said to be one of the most senior fighters in the Izzedine al-Qassam brigades before the Israelis took him out on Saturday. The ceasefire is still being held together with duct tape while the search for the body of slain hostage Ron Gvili has yet to be found. The Israelis believe they know which Hamas operatives know where Gvili is buried, but the flooding in Gaza may make finding him more difficult for now. In the meantime, Hamas's ranks continue to thin out. Again, I can't say the word senior Hamas guy any longer. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, an endgame is still not yet fully in sight. We'll have to see what happens in the coming days. The United States rejected yet another one-sided UN General Assembly resolution targeting Israel. This time, it was an attempt to enshrine the conclusions of a non-binding advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. Of course, that was excoriating Israel. I'm particularly proud of this action because the diplomat who slammed the UN is a longtime friend of mine, Ambassador Jeff Bartos. Keep it up, Jeff. We're all proud of you. The IDF carried out 3 separate drone attacks in southern Lebanon on Sunday, taking out 3 Hezbollah operatives who were reportedly violating the terms of the ceasefire agreement. That's another ceasefire agreement being held together with duct tape. Media out of Lebanon reported strikes against cars in the South Lebanon towns of Yatir, Safad al-Batih, and Joiya. All 3 made kills, but it's not clear exactly which Hezbollahis met their end or why. And finally, the dance continues between Turkey and the United States about the possible sale of those F-35 fighter jets to Ankara. You've all heard me say it on this program before. It's a supremely bad idea. But now the Turks have come out and said that they're not willing to part with the Russian-made S-400 systems that got them kicked out of the F-35 fighter jet program in the first place. In other words, they have declared that they are unwilling to compromise. Also, it appears that they have forgotten who the superpower is here. Someone needs to explain to me why the United States is still having a conversation with these terror-supporting and unreliable allies. All right, it's time for a conversation I recorded late last week with Hagar Chemali. Hagar served time at the Treasury Department shortly after I did, working on the sanctions file. She worked for the UN mission to the UN. She teaches at Columbia. She's a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, and she has a hilarious foreign policy podcast called Oh My World, where she dresses up like world leaders and she impersonates them. I highly recommend it. She's not in character for this interview, maybe for future ones. She's just being herself here, but that's more than enough for this fascinating conversation we had on Hezbollah and Lebanon. So have a listen. Welcome to the program, Hagar Chemali.
Jonathan, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Really happy to have you. All right. You are a Lebanon watcher, among other things. Podcaster extraordinaire, former terror finance official, but you've done a lot of work on Lebanon. So tell us, what is going on right now along that Lebanon-Israel frontier? Where are we? Specifically, I guess, maybe just tell us a little bit about the state of Lebanon.
Sure. So just to catch us up very quickly, you had an escalation last year that happened last fall between Israel and Hezbollah, and it ended in a ceasefire last November. So now 1 year into this ceasefire, the ceasefire still technically holds. There is something called the mechanism where Lebanese and Israeli militaries meet to ensure that disarmament is continuing, disarmament particularly south of the Litani River. But the U.S. is insistent that that disarmament happen across the country, which I am also very in supportive of. But that said, as you've had this ceasefire, Israel continues to strike weapons depots, missile arsenals, and Hezbollah leaders an average of twice a day. So they strike about twice a day. And Hezbollah hasn't responded, which is, I think, very important, other than you've seen some statements, right? Some chest thumping, if you will, from either Hezbollah's leader and occasionally the Lebanese government itself. But on the whole, 1 year in, the ceasefire holds. There has been progress and improvement in disarmament south of the Litani River. The Lebanese government has promised to be fully clear and to have the Lebanese Armed Forces, otherwise known as the LAF, the LAF, in control fully of the south of Lebanon by the end of the year. A lot of assessments are that while there's been progress, they're not exactly where we want them to be, but things are improving. However, north of the Litani River is where we're seeing a lot of concern of Hezbollah rebuilding, rearming at an alarming rate, and statements occasionally coming from the Lebanese government that either indicate that they don't want to address the north. Sometimes they say they do. The Speaker of the House, Nabi Berri, who's persistently been a problem, has said today that while they'll disarm the south, they would quote unquote contain the north. Containment's not an option. That's not going to happen. So anyway, that's the state of where we are now. And so, you see reason for progress and reason for hope, but also reason for continued concern.
Yeah. And that mechanism, by the way, is amazing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it really is like the Israelis call in to the United States and say, we got a problem in Sector 12 in Lebanon. And then the U.S. calls the Lebanese Armed Forces, they call the Lebanese government, and they say, all right, guys, you guys want to take care of this problem in Sector 12? And they go, Yanni, I'm not sure. And then the U.S. calls Israel back and says, doesn't look like the Lebanese are going to do anything. And then the Israelis just like have a finger on the trigger and they just start pounding these positions. And that explains those 2 strikes a day on average. But now, where are we with Hezbollah? I mean, this is a weaker organization, right? We talk about the Grim Beeper operation and the bombing. The Israelis did something amazing when they killed Hassan Nasrallah. They dropped 82,000 bombs in 17 seconds and destroyed his bunker. And it was amazing. A remarkable moment in military history. And I think something that was a pivot point in the Middle East. But so where is Hezbollah now? They're not dead. They're not fully, they're Schrödinger's Hezbollah. Is that kind of where we are? What's their story?
So, all right. So first I have to, let me talk about the LAF very quickly, and then I'll give the latest on Hezbollah because it all ties together. The LAF, like you said, so you've got this mechanism and you summed it up really well. Some battalions and some soldiers are excellent and will go after these weapons to either destroy and seize them. And then you have a whole bunch of other battalions or soldiers that, for different variety of reasons, whether they're sympathizers, whether they're fearful for their families, or whether they're just not paid well and they're holding down 2 jobs and they're not motivated, either are not going after those weapons, or they take the Hezbollah excuse of private property, so they don't go. Or there have been reports, especially recently, that some individuals within the LAF are telling Hezbollah, like, hey, by the way, we're going to be in that section, in that area, in this region at this time. So FYI, right? So you've got, that's why, and that's why I say, right, I often say it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that gets us to where Hezbollah is today. So right after the escalation last year, Hezbollah was significantly weakened. You had not just Hassan Nasrallah killed, but you had that pager explosion operation that took out a number of operatives and commanders, and also really scared people in the organization to understand that the organization had been penetrated to that extent. So they were really sitting on their heels, and that it's important to note that that's coupled with the fact that Bashar al-Assad had fled Damascus and ran to Moscow like a coward, and that Iran, once Israel and the U.S. reflected that we own their skies, that Iran was also on the defense, right, on its sitting on its heels. So Hezbollah for a while there was still present, but weaker, significantly weaker. And now what we're seeing over the last couple of months specifically is Iran has doubled down. Hezbollah has doubled down on its effort to rebuild, to rearm. So we're seeing efforts where, and you and I both know this from our work in counterterrorism, which is that these terrorist groups, it's a game of whack-a-mole. They adapt to new, they evolve, they adapt, they figure out ways to refund, to rearm themselves. And that's what they are figuring out. They are building at-home capabilities to build weapons and drones and so on. This is also especially concerning. So the state of Hezbollah in general is, 1 year in, we are seeing that they are finding ways to rebuild and rearm. They are very organized in preparing themselves for the May 2026 elections, parliamentary elections. They want to get as many Shia seats in the parliament as possible, and they are they're getting money again. But their leader is nothing like Hassan Nasrallah. No. They still have, now you have Shia in the south who are calling for peace, because unlike the 2006 war, Hezbollah is not rebuilding their homes. They don't want to waste their money. And so you are seeing they're not fully strong again, but they're not in the weakened state they were a year ago either. Right.
Somewhere in between. Yeah. I will note, Naim Qassem, the new head of Hezbollah, not a military guy. This is literally the propagandist. This is the Goebbels of Hezbollah, not equipped for the job that he has. And a lot of people in Israel are saying, this is the guy we want to have stay in the chair. But at the same time, it's the commanders under him, I think, that are really causing real concern. But another concern is the money, right? I've seen the reports. I know you have as well. $1 billion from Iran to Hezbollah. One hub in particular, which is really frustrating, but also predictable, Dubai. See that coming up a lot. I've been hearing a little bit about northern Cyprus, Turkish-controlled northern Cyprus. I'm hearing that the border between Lebanon and Syria, it was shut down by the Shara regime, the Jolani regime, dare I say, and now it's kind of back open for business for some of these arms smugglers. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about the financial state of play right now. How do you game that out?
Yeah, so this $1 billion is really concerning. And this is, Iran has sent, according to U.S. intelligence assessments, $1 billion to Hezbollah just this year in 2025, $1 billion. And what's on top of it concerning, so this reflects a few things, right? So number one, it reflects the extent to which Hezbollah was hit financially in the escalation last year, not just in their own weapons that they lost, but Israel also targeted, Hezbollah's basically de facto bank, Al-Qard al-Hassan, which is a sanctioned entity. And on top of it Treasury has followed up with sanctions. This is a nonprofit that functions as a financial institution in Lebanon, and Lebanon needs to shut it down. But that said, this they were hit hard, and you're seeing Iran not only show, okay, we're going to replenish your coffers, but they are looking for new ways to do it, because the way Iran used to do it was send suitcases full of cash to Beirut's airport. Now that has been shut down and pretty much shut down, the airport has improved significantly this year in terms of preventing these kinds of transfers, if you will. And Syria, this is an important one, because at first, when Jolani al-Shara, whichever terrorist in a suit, took over, though, Jolani hates Hezbollah, has no reason to love Hezbollah, but he also has a lot of problems on his own. So that land bridge between Iran and Lebanon was shut down over Syria, was shut down. But then the north, like you said, where you have the Bekaa Valley, started reopening again. Hezbollah controls those ports of entry. Now, I will tell you that Trump asked al-Shara to help on disarmament. And last week, they stopped a major shipment of weapons. They intercepted a major shipment of weapons going through the north to Hezbollah. So that's good news. But that said, my point is that Iran has shifted and said, okay, well, how else are we going to get them money? And they went to a tried and true method of working through the UAE. So $1 billion that's estimated to be from the sale of oil proceeds. It goes through the UAE, through different front companies, exchangers, digital money exchangers. And then from there, it is transferred to Lebanon through the informal Hawala system, largely. Now, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, and the rest of it is estimated to be going through Turkey, Iraq, Turkish-controlled Cyprus, like you said, and also folks are saying also through crypto in some instances. Crypto is banned in Lebanon, but there are unofficial, unlicensed exchangers that are taking crypto and exchanging it. So,
sure.
Yeah.
And I got to say that the thing that shocks me, none of it shocks me, right? Except for the Turkish part of this, which is just insane when you think about this. Is like they've crossed over this weird, the Sunni Shiite divide, this weird, uniting of the fronts, if you will. Never would I have thought, 5-10 years ago that the Turks would have been involved in that. Hamas, is a Sunni group. Hezbollah, purely Shiite and a purely Iranian proxy. And here they are essentially just getting into the mix. I find it shocking, but I got to tell you, Dubai drives me crazy. The UAE, they're so good on so many things, and yet this one emirate, they can't seem to get a handle on, and they're just consistently a hub for illicit finance. Abu Dhabi can be great, but it's constantly being offset by Dubai, and it drives me nuts. But okay, I want to ask you about this strange episode. Early December, I was actually in Israel, and I had a very quiet time there. Didn't have to run to shelter. It was like the first time that I could take a shower and not worry whether I had to go, quickly get into a bathrobe and run down to the shelter. So a friend of mine shares with me this article, and it essentially, the news is that the U.S. went to officials in Iraq and warned that a confrontation was imminent between Israel and Lebanon, that Israel was about to just open up a can of whoop tachat, I guess I could call it, on Hezbollah. And then all of a sudden, instead of war breaking out, the U.S. basically says, all right, you two knuckleheads, you're getting in the same room and you're talking this out. And apparently it happened. And we're now, for the first time in 7 decades, or maybe the exact amount of time, you've got Lebanese and Israeli officials actually talking. And so instead of going to war, you get this. This looks like normalization. What's going on?
Yeah, it does. Listen, I would say that it's funny because we are as close to war as we are to peace, I would say, which I know sounds weird, but I think a lot of us also believe sometimes that you need kinetic action to get to peace, right? So, I've been called a warmonger before, and I would say that my goal is not to just spread war everywhere, but I do believe in the value of force and military efforts and activity in getting to peace. And I think that's what you're seeing here. But so you still have, I should be clear, you still have the threat of escalation again. And the reason for that is due to the disarmament in Lebanon, which, as we mentioned, that there are 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You see disarmament in the south, and you see it progressing, maybe not as fast as we'd like, but then really concerning behavior north of the Litani River. And that's not going to fly. That's not going to be acceptable either to the Israelis or to the United States. And so you have this in general, you have those strikes that continue. Those strikes that are twice a day could continue as they are. Hezbollah's not responding. The Israelis are tired from 2 years of war, and maybe they don't feel the urgency. But that said, anything could trigger it. At the same time, you have the civilian dialogue you're talking about. The thing that's so fascinating and important with that is that this is something that this administration, Morgan Ortagus in particular, has been working on and pushing for all year. This is not an easy achievement, and it is a big one, and it deserves to be celebrated. You have direct dialogue between civilian officials. You have not had direct dialogue between Lebanese and Israeli officials since 1993. And so meaning no U.S. official shuttling between rooms. She was not going to accept that anymore. And the beauty of this is not just that you have two people talking directly. And from what I understand, by the way, those talks went really, really well. It's that, and by the way, the Lebanese official that was chosen, the person that was chosen to represent Lebanon, is a former ambassador who has been very vocal against Hezbollah, has been very critical of Hezbollah's moves, has blamed Hezbollah for the violence that the Lebanese have seen. So that already says a lot as well. But just to your point about, wait a minute, what's happening here? These talks are every other week. And the next talks, they have committed to also discuss potential economic opportunities between both sides. So to me, somebody who's been working on Lebanon-Israel peace in general, you see signs, like there's so many signs and reasons for hope. That is exactly how you get to normalization. It's almost like it happens before you actually get there. But that said, I want to be very realistic here. You could still see an escalation. Yeah. It could still happen. That doesn't mean that efforts toward normalization or peace are derailed.
No, it's kind of part of the picture. You summed it up perfectly. The Israelis still talk about those, long range missiles that could hit Tel Aviv from northern Lebanon, and they talk about destroying those. But at the same time, they're actually talking directly to the Lebanese government about, what comes next. Really amazing stuff. I learned a lot. So want to thank you for joining us today on the FTD Morning Brief, Hagar Chemali.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, this is the part of the show when I tell you to go read our website and to check out all the content on our socials and to give generously as we steer into the last 2 weeks of 2025. Contributions to FTD are tax deductible, and beyond that, they just make you feel warm and fuzzy when it's cold outside. As always, I encourage you to head over to ftd.org/invest to learn more. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FTD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer signing off for FTD.